Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome to my channel. My name is Stephanie Yates Anyabwile, Steph Anya for short, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. In today's video, I'm going to be answering your questions about the series on Netflix, You. If you're curious, stay tuned. What's on your mind? I want to remind you guys to go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel. I usually say that at the end, but I'm trying to get into the habit of saying it earlier on for those of you who don't always make it to the end. You guys were talking so much about this most recent season 3, that I had to plow through it, and I've been asked a few questions about it. In today's video, I'm going to be answering questions that you all sent me about You. I will warn you guys, if you haven't finished it yet, there probably will be some spoilers in this video, so definitely finish watching and come back. Shout out to all of you that sent me questions to answer in this video. I'm going to be answering questions about what I thought about The Therapist with couples therapy, the diagnosis that I would give Joe, my view on Love and Joe's relationship, and Sherry and Carrie's open relationship. I'm going to be trying my best to fly through these questions. If you need me to go more in depth on any of these questions, let me know and I can do a separate video answering just those. Let's jump in. Okay, first question. Do you feel that their therapist could have done anything better? I personally loved how raw she was. So I agree with her. I thought that The Therapist was very well written on this show. I'm going to share some of the pros and the cons of the work that I saw her doing with Joe and Love. I'm going to start with the cons because the pros keep referring back to the cons, so I figured that was the best way to start it. So cons wise, one thing I didn't like is that you'll notice at the very beginning of their interactions, she says,
I don't think this fight has anything to do with Joe so-called cheating.
She doesn't?
You don't? Not really.
Now, often as therapists, we are in a position where a couple or individual family, they're telling us this is the problem, and we're already thinking like, is this really the problem? Because often you're in therapy to help untangle the issues that you probably don't get a chance to talk about very often or think through. So we're probably already thinking about different clients that we've had who've come to us with a problem similar to the one you're saying you're having that ended up being something else. But never in a million years would I tell a couple or a client right off the bat that is not the problem, because that creates a hierarchy in the relationship between therapist and clients that's not necessarily healthy. Because what you're saying is that I know your life better than you know your life, which is absolutely not true. At this point, the client has, in their case, 30 plus years of experience in their own lives, and you have known them for 5 minutes. So to say this is not the problem can be a little problematic. What she should have done instead is asked an open-ended question. So you would say something along the lines of, do you believe that is your only problem? How confident are you that that is the problem? Those kind of questions would naturally lead the client to the possibility that maybe there are other things at play here, even beyond what they've already considered. Now, this is just my take. Being a collaborative therapist or any postmodern therapist, you're going to want to avoid that expert relationship with your clients because it really does take away a lot of their agency, because the motivation to change happens within the client. It happens in all of the hours outside of the therapy session. So you don't want them to be dependent on the therapeutic relationship to change. You just want to be more of a guide that leads them through their own process and rationale. That is one thing that I personally did not like. There may be other therapists who agree with it, but from my perspective, I try to, when I can, lead with open questions, which can be hard. That's pretty much leading into the major con that I saw with her work. She made a lot of statements instead of asking questions. The meme or gif that we see going around everywhere is when she says, you are a lot of things, but you are not murderers. That is an assumption. We, the audience, know that they are. They, the client, know that they are, but she, the therapist, is the one making a declarative statement, which we all knew to be untrue. This is an example of when making assumptions goes terribly wrong, right? Because had she just framed it as, so you're concerned that he would kill you. Do you think he's a murderer? Or are you all murderers? Asking those questions, she might be able to pick up on body language or cues that would let her know that maybe there is something deeper here. Or in some cases, now we know that they probably wouldn't do this, but in some cases, asking those questions actually puts your client in a position of being relieved that the topic has been brought into the room so that they can start sharing and revealing some things that they're not comfortable sharing with other people in their life. So I would say this therapist flaw is making assumptions instead of asking questions. Now let's talk about the pros. I love how she commented on body language. So at one point, Jo was making a face or body language where she said, "You seem repulsed." Again, with the statement, she could have said instead, "You seem repulsed to me. Is that how you're feeling?" Again, asking questions I think is really important, but I love that she commented on body language. To me, that's an important feature or attribute in any good therapist, is that they are going to be able to pay attention to your body language, especially with couples. I might say, "I noticed that you turned away from her when she said that," or "I noticed that you rolled your eyes. What does that mean to you? Am I off in that assessment?" Asking those kind of questions about body language can really tell us sometimes a lot more than what's being communicated verbally by the couple. I also love that she had them working on reflective listening. My last video, actually about 10 tips for good communication, I talk about active/reflective listening, and I love that she had them do that. So you see Jo and Love, testing that out and trying to do it. It's a very, very hard way to communicate and a very, very slow way to communicate. But I love that she had them doing that. That was one of the things when I started out as an intern, seeing couples that I didn't really know about. And my supervisor told me about it, and it was a game changer in couples therapy, because you really get insight into how often people misinterpret what is being said by the other person. And at the end of the day, each of you are responding to something that wasn't even said, and the conversation gets nowhere. So I do talk more about that in my last video if you want more information about that. Another pro is that she commented on them fighting to be right. I can't tell you how often people come to therapy with the expectation to really win the therapist over to their side so that they can just prove to their partner that they're right. That is not effective therapy, and therapists have to work really, really hard to try to not stay in the middle, because sometimes people are dead wrong, but to try to remain as objective as possible and not lean into whatever our own experiences are in our personal lives that would make us align with one of the partners. And so it is really, really important to recognize when your clients are fighting to be right instead of the real goal, which should be to fight as a team to understand the problem and tackle it together. I really appreciated that she called that out, fighting to be right, because ultimately nobody wins if neither of you understands the other person's point of view, because the relationship's not going to improve unless you can empathize with one another and even anticipate how your partner is going to feel. The last pro I want to comment on is when she asked Jo, "What's the feeling under the rage?" But what she's asking there, what's under the rage, there is a view of certain emotions as secondary and then other emotions as more specific, your core emotions. So what might start out as annoyance is actually a show of your anger, which is actually indicative of rage, for example. So we always want to ask, what are the feelings under the emotions clients are feeling? Because we can get a lot further in understanding the traumas or triggers, stress responses that are contributing to whatever dysfunction is showing itself or manifesting within their relationships. So in this case, what started out as rage was actually linked to a fear of abandonment. So we could make that connection by simply asking them to think further about how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. Those are my thoughts on the therapist, what she could have done better, and the things that I thought she did great. Overall, I thought the therapist was written very, very well, and a lot of the choices that she made in the room, I totally agree with and would have done the same thing. So I loved having the couples therapist on this season. Another question that a lot of you asked is, what would I diagnose Jo with? And so this is kind of tricky because Jo is a fictional character, and I have definitely diagnosed fictional characters before, but those are easier to do when the writers have a clear point of view on what diagnosis the character would have, and they write based on that diagnosis. Jo really meets so many different diagnoses that you can't really get them in one. And honestly, if I tried to go into the details of every single one, it would be too long of a video. So if you want a separate video showing all the times that Joe met the criteria for these different diagnoses, then let me know. An obvious one would be like narcissism, right? I do have actually a couple of videos about the characteristics of narcissism and how many you would need to have checked off to meet the criteria. I'll put those here in the cards. Some of the things that we see Joe do that are narcissistic, you know, having a really high sense of self-importance. Joe has a God complex, right? He thinks that it is satisfactory for him to make decisions about whether or not a person deserves to live or die. So I don't know any higher sense of self-importance that a person could have. We also see other characteristics that most of us have become familiar with narcissism, like love bombing. You know, even think about, you know, how Joe was with Love, saying that he would love her unconditionally. We talk about a narcissist, we're talking about grandiosity. They have huge expectations of fantasies when it comes to certain things. And for Joe, I think that really is love, not the character. Love the concept. Sometimes I get frustrated that that's her name because you can't really ever say that without clarifying, but Joe has really big ideas of what his love life should look like, what he deserves. It's unrealistic in a sense, right? Joe doesn't care if a person is already involved with someone else. He doesn't care about their privacy. He just thinks that it is his job to look out for that person and take care of them by any means necessary. He's basically doing big, grandiose gestures. I mean, the ultimate sacrifice, which is taking a life, to justify why this person should be with him, why he's the only person that could be with them. They're a perfect match. You know, he's watching them. He doesn't respect them. And he clearly has no empathy for the lives that are lost. He sees people as very one-dimensional. They're either good or bad. Really, if they're not the object of his affection at that moment, then they're disposable in a sense. He really doesn't have a good sense of self-awareness. We even saw that in season 3 where, you know, okay, so Love has similar characteristics. And the way that Joe judges her shows such a lack of self-awareness. I would say he borders on delusional. Joe could also meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder. I know I see a lot of times people talking about psychopath and sociopath. Those aren't real diagnoses, at least not in our current edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Shorthand the DSM, there is no diagnosis of being a sociopath or a psychopath, but usually when people are referring to that, they're talking about antisocial personality disorder. Some of the main criteria for antisocial personality disorder, things like lying, being manipulative, acting impulsively, breaking laws. Essentially, like, you have a lack of regard for other people or even your own safety. And so that's why we say he kind of meets the criteria, because this is a TV show. They try to portray Joe through an empathetic lens, right? You're trying to get to know the serial killer and understand him. I actually think Love meets this criteria more than Joe, because she definitely seems to be more impulsive than Joe is. Joe definitely meets some of those things. You know, he, again, with the God complex, I think his narcissism outshines everything else, because he really thinks that he's doing what's best for the people around him. And a lot of times, you know, the audience feels that same way as well. But ultimately, remember, we are seeing this through his lens. So those people might have redeeming qualities or traits, you know, in the real world that we wouldn't know about, because we're seeing the world through his eyes and hearing his thoughts as we're looking. And so those are a couple of the diagnoses that I would think about with Joe. There's also, now that they're starting to introduce more things about like him and his backstory, attachment style wise, I would also consider Joe's attachment. Joe shows signs of a disorganized attachment. His mother was there for him and not there for him. That inconsistency is going to contribute to disorganized attachment. I do have a video all about attachment styles. If you want more details about that, I'll put that in the cards. But I think that with Joe, also witnessing his father beat his mother, because the thing about attachment is that your primary caregivers are supposed to represent safety for you, a secure base where you can go explore and you can count that they're going to be there and help you if any danger arises. But when your primary caregivers actually represent the danger, and then at times they represent that safe haven for you, that creates disorganized attachment. So this a lot of times will bleed into what we know colloquially as trust issues or difficulty committing, all of those different things, because Joe gets very wrapped up in that obsessive aspect, you know, the honeymoon aspect of falling for someone. But when it gets to the actual working through the relationship aspect, that's where he really struggles. To wrap up, the three things that I would look at most for Joe would be 2 DSM diagnoses, which would be a narcissistic personality disorder as well as antisocial personality disorder. And then I would also think about his attachment style, which would be disorganized attachment from my point of view. We might also even talk about PTSD after we saw, you know, Joe's earliest experiences in childhood and being bullied and killing his father. PTSD could be a huge factor as well. But again, if you want a video about those diagnoses, or even if you want me to go through the different things we saw with Joe and how they relate to the different diagnoses, let me know that as well, and I can spend a lot more time on it. Talking about attachment leads me to the next great question. In reference to Love and Joe, she goes, it's weird because they're crazy, but they connect authentically as their true selves. Thoughts? I agree with this. I absolutely agree with this. And I think it goes back to that attachment issue with Joe. I think Love actually sees him too clearly. Now, what we saw play out in the therapy room is that both of them talked about if people really knew how ugly they can be, they would leave. But I think that it's actually doublefold, because there's also this deep desire not to be seen, right? So you think, oh, then if somebody really sees them, then they would love that. But actually, when you get so accustomed to hiding parts of yourself, being seen can be very, very uncomfortable. So Joe being with Love is like looking in a mirror, and he does not like what he sees. If he would have worked harder at forgiving himself, you know, learning to love himself, it would have been easier for him to love Love, and the same for her. He put himself in a position where he needed to deny so many fundamental truths about himself so that he could view Love as the villain. So the relationship was sabotaged from that standpoint. But I do agree that this relationship had the potential to be an amazing love story, because this was the first person his entire life that saw him clearly. But you can see that he doesn't see himself through the lens of reality. So he really wants somebody to see him through the lens that he's created for himself. So the last question I'll be answering in this video is about Sherry and Carrie's relationship. I got a few questions. Please share your thoughts on open polygamous marriages and relationships, specifically ones that mainly just involve sex with others. And then I'd like to hear your take on Sherry and Carrie's marriage. It was oddly refreshing to see that they genuinely love each other. So I will talk about both of those. So I agree that especially how Sherry and Carrie handled themselves in the cage. I loved the way that they communicated with one another about the purple flag, red flag. Those are things that are markers to me if I'm seeing a couple that they have created their own language, which can be so, so important for a successful relationship. Not that you have to have flags and get that specific, but you and your partner should have a way of communicating that is basically saying, hey, I'm getting to a point where I'm getting triggered, or I'm getting to a point where I'm getting hurt or offended, and I need us to kind of reset this conversation. When you're able to course correct in the middle of a conversation, even when Carrie goes, I'm sensing a tone, the way she responded to that, I was like, oh my gosh, like that is the dream, seeing couples communicate that way. Even when they approached Love and Joe about swinging together, the way they already had their process together, they already have their documents together, they knew what to talk about, they've been doing this for a while, they really functioned as a team. Even apparent when they both just got up and left the restaurant, because they already knew like this is not going the way that we would anticipate it to go, you come back to us. I love that. And so my view in general about open relationships or polygamous relationships is that they can work. If you have a relationship where there is open, honest, authentic communication about wants, needs, fantasies, fears, if we can talk about those things openly, have the dialogue going, and be honest about why we're wanting these things, where I see open relationships or polygamous relationships really going wrong is when you have something already missing in your relationship, and your attachment is so that you're so anxious, you aren't comfortable making a clean break, but you think maybe by bringing in a new person into the situation, that might alleviate some of the tension. That is triangulation. triangulation. If you're here from GQ, I talk about triangulation in that video, but you're really trying to offset some of the tension and anxiety in your relationship onto a third person to help balance it out. That's where it can really, really go wrong because the relationship is already unstable. But if you have a couple that's already stable, you have good communication, this could be an option if this is something that you've always wanted to try or do. I think that couples or partners should make their own rules in their relationship. One of the biggest things I tell my clients is don't let society tell you what your marriage or relationship should look like. Don't let society tell you about the appropriate gender roles. Don't let society tell you about how to talk to each other. Don't let society tell you how to post about each other. Whatever feels natural and authentic and good for each of you, talk about that and try to negotiate the best way to just show each other that you love each other and get the best out of this one life that we all have to live. So I do think it can work, but I do think that it takes a lot more effort and a lot more communication to make that work, because it can lead to certain jealousies. It can lead to different alliances within the group. So you have to be very clear on what your expectations are. And again, have your own language to communicate if we're getting to the point where it's too much. That's all the questions I have time to answer today. I hope you found this good. There are some other great questions you guys asked. Like someone asked about my thoughts on the relationship between Love and her mother. And so that I think would be a whole separate video. A lot of these questions could have been their own video. So if you want me to go into detail about any of those questions, or you have other things you want me to talk about, I'm happy to do multiple videos about you. There's so much to talk about. But also, I know a lot of you have already sent me requests for shows and movies that you want me to review. So let me know what we need to do, okay? We have a lot of ground to cover when it comes to these films and TV shows. So I thank you all so much, especially all of you who sent me questions. You really made this video a lot easier to do, knowing exactly what you wanted me to talk about. I hope that you found this helpful or interesting. Let me know what other questions you might still have. I ask that you like this video, subscribe to my channel. Again, my name is Stephanie Yates Anyabwile, Steph Anya for short. I truly appreciate you for watching all the way until the end of the video. That really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. So thank you.